extremely frustrating. I was angry because we were left with it's a 30-minute drive to South Hill or a 30-minute drive to Emporia.
You might think one thing that almost never disappears in America is the pharmacy. Restaurants can shut down, grocery stores can lose customers, but as long as people still get sick, pharmacies still have to exist. And yet, in America in 2026, pharmacies are closing one after another, and that number just keeps growing. The demand for medicine is not going down. What is shrinking is people's access to it. Every store that disappears leaves people with fewer choices and makes them more dependent on insurance and large healthcare systems. This is no longer just a race to see which pharmacy chain survives. It is a race to see how much people will have to put up with before getting their medication becomes a burden. So what is pushing American pharmacies into the situation? Why is an industry that sells something people absolutely need finding it harder and harder to survive? And who will control where Americans get their medicine next? Today, come with me as we take a close look at what is really happening to the American pharmacy industry. Watch this now. You need to know what is happening and have a backup plan ready before the pharmacy you still use becomes the next one to close. Rite Aid is closing. All its stores. Where will millions of customers go?
The Rite Aid in Mill Basin closed its pharmacy, sending customers scrambling to fill their prescriptions. As News 12's Kelly Kennedy shows us, for seniors and families, that extra...
A store closing down might not seem all that unusual in America, but this time the name on the sign is Rite Aid. This used to be one of the most familiar retail pharmacy chains in America. After its second bankruptcy in 2025, the remaining stores started closing one by one until Rite Aid's entire retail network disappeared. So what happens to the people who used to go there every month to pick up their medication? When the asset sale process began, Rite Aid still had around 1,200 stores and served about 8 million customers. Prescription records were transferred to several other pharmacy systems, including CVS, Walgreens, Albertsons, and Kroger. That sounds pretty simple. Rite Aid closes and customers move to another pharmacy. But look at what happened to Victor Cericio. Victor Cericio is 70 years old. He used to need just one bus ride to get to Rite Aid. After the pharmacy closed, he had to take 2 buses and then walk farther to get to CVS. The new trip added about 45 minutes to his travel time. If you still drive 45 minutes, it might just feel like an inconvenience. But if you're old or live alone or need to pick up medication regularly every month, having to take 2 extra bus rides is no small thing. And what if the person making that trip is your mom or dad? Do you know where their next pharmacy is? Can they get there on their own? Or from now on, will they have to wait for someone else to drive them every time they need to pick up their medication and one store closes? But people's need to get their medication does not disappear with it. Because if this were just the story of one brand, we could stop right here. But unfortunately, Rite Aid is not the only pharmacy chain getting smaller. The entire U.S. retail pharmacy industry is shrinking. You might think that if Rite Aid closes, customers can just switch to Walgreens or CVS. It is not that simple. Things have become much more concerning. Rite Aid could still be seen as an isolated case, but once you get to Walgreens, that explanation starts to become a lot less convincing. One of the largest pharmacy chains in America is also cutting its store network heavily. At this point, the problem is no longer just one brand struggling. It is starting to directly affect the choices that people still have left, and they are already feeling it. Did you hear that? Again? That is right again. They have to go find another pharmacy themselves, transfer their prescriptions, check their insurance all over again, and get used to a completely new place from scratch. At first, that might sound like just a few little errands, but for someone who has used the same pharmacy for years, what they lose is more than just a convenient location close to home. They also lose that sense of familiarity, knowing what time it is less crowded, knowing who to call when there is a problem with a prescription, and sometimes even having a pharmacist who remembers what medications they take, or which family member usually comes in to pick them up. None of that shows up on a receipt, but it makes getting medication more predictable and less stressful. Especially for older people, that familiarity is worth more than we might realize, and when the store closes, that stability disappears with it. But the problem is Walgreens is still not the last name on the list. Even CVS, which is taking on some of Rite Aid's former customers, is not staying out of this wave of store reductions. The company had planned to close another 271 stores in 2025 alone. This is where the bigger picture becomes hard to ignore. Rite Aid disappears. Walgreens cuts a large number of locations. CVS keeps shrinking its network too. 3 different companies, 3 different situations. I am not saying CVS or Walgreens will disappear the way Rite Aid did, but the person standing there with a bag of medication in their hand does not care whether those 3 companies call their plans restructuring network optimization or anything else. They just need to know if the pharmacy near my home closes. Where else can I go? And there is still another pharmacy somewhere in town does not always solve the problem. It might be several miles farther away. You might have to change bus routes. The hours might not work with your job. Your insurance might make one location much more practical than another. If you are managing 5 or 6 medications for yourself or handling medications for aging parents, every pharmacy closure adds one more thing you have to organize in a life that already has plenty to keep track of. What makes this especially troubling is how quietly it happens. One store closes in one neighborhood. A few months later, another one disappears somewhere else. If you are still healthy and do not need medication regularly, you might not even notice. Until the day a store closing sign shows up right in front of the pharmacy your family has always used. Think about it right now. How many pharmacies around your home can you actually use? Not how many dots show up on Google Maps. How many places can you get to easily use your insurance and pick up your medication without having to rearrange half of your day? That is the part that is hardest to understand. The need for medication is not disappearing. Americans still have to pick up their medications every single day. So why do the places selling something this essential keep having to shrink? To understand that we have to look at how a pharmacy actually makes money. And that is where we run into a huge contradiction. Selling more medication does not necessarily mean the business is doing better. A pharmacy can sell medication and still lose money. When people talk about why pharmacies in America are finding it harder and harder to survive, it is easy to assume that they are simply losing customers. But prescription medication is not something people can just stop buying. Someone with high blood pressure still needs their medication, and someone with diabetes still has to get refills. A child with asthma still needs an inhaler. So why is it so hard to make money selling something people absolutely need? Because selling medication does not mean a pharmacy is guaranteed to make a profit. A pharmacy buys, the medication fills the prescription correctly, the insurance company approves the claim, and the customer pays their share. But in some cases, the final amount the pharmacy gets back is still less than what it costs them. If you sell something and lose money every time you sell it, what is the solution? Sell more of it. Behind the counter, there are also PBMs, which manage many of the rules around which medications are covered, pharmacy networks, and reimbursement rates. Customers do not see that maze. They only see 3 things. Is the medication available? Will insurance cover it? And how much money do I have to pull out of my wallet today?
They could save on drugs that people are already taking. So I just want to bring this to people's attention because honestly, something needs to be done.
Did you hear that? Unable to get their medication? Unable to afford their medication? Those are 2 things patients feel immediately. But on the other side of the counter, there is another question most people never think about after the prescription is processed. How much money does the pharmacy actually have left? The FTC has documented cases where reimbursement can fall below the actual costs an independent pharmacy has to pay. Think about it in the simplest way possible. A pharmacy pays $100 to buy a medication. The prescription gets processed, the customer gets the medication, and the insurance goes through the system. But the store only gets $97 back. Sounds backwards, right? You make a sale and still lose money. $3 does not sound like much, but a pharmacy is not only paying for the medication itself. Pharmacists, technicians, rental electricity, software security, and inventory all still have to be paid for. And PBMs do not explain everything either. Traditional drugstores also make money from the front of the store by selling shampoo, vitamins, snacks, and household products. But now those products face direct competition from Walmart, Costco, grocery stores, and Amazon. So pharmacies are getting squeezed from both sides. The pharmacy counter is under reimbursement pressure while the retail side keeps losing customers. Meanwhile, the costs do not go away. So where do they cut fewer employees? Shorter hours, one pharmacist handling more prescriptions, or just closing locations that are no longer profitable enough. And when those cuts reach the pharmacy counter, the first person to feel them is not the shareholder. It is the person waiting for their medication. Customers are running into more problems at pharmacies that are still open. If a pharmacy is still open, but every time you need medication it turns into phone calls, waiting and coming back again, can we really still call that a service that is working normally? Picking up a prescription used to be pretty predictable. Your doctor sends it in. The pharmacy gets the medication ready. You stop by, pick up the bag, and go home. But for more and more customers, the frustrating part is not just the long wait. They no longer know whether a refill is going to take 20 minutes, 2 hours, or 2 separate trips. The app still says processing. You call, but you cannot get anyone on the phone. You show up and the medication's not ready. The pharmacy tells you to come back later. The next time you go, one medication is temporarily out of stock or your insurance suddenly has another requirement. One problem by itself is manageable. But put all of them together and suddenly the customer becomes the person managing the whole process. You check the app, call the pharmacy, call the doctor, check your insurance, check the pharmacy hours, and then try to figure out whether it is even worth driving over there today. People are not getting angry just because something takes an extra 10 minutes. They're getting angry because something that used to be predictable now has to be tracked from beginning to end. Now look at what is happening behind the counter.
Full understaffing. They keep perpetuating this narrative of like there's a staffing issue, there's a pharmacist shortage, there's like technician, there's no shortage.
Did you hear that? Everything. According to Forbes, there were times when she had to handle customers picking up medication, new prescriptions, vaccines, filling prescriptions, and checking medications all by herself. Every person standing at the counter has one problem they need solved, but the person behind the counter is dealing with everybody's problems at the same time. I understand why the employees are overwhelmed. But understanding their situation does not make your prescription magically appear. You still have to come back, change your schedule, or squeeze in a phone call during your lunch break. And if that medication is for your parents, your child, or something you personally take every day, hearing try again tomorrow does not feel minor at all. What bothers me is how easily all of this gets brushed off as bad service. But this is not a restaurant bringing your food out late. The pharmacist still has to check the prescription before the medication gets into your hands, the dosage, the patient information, and anything that needs to be clarified. Meanwhile, the phone is still ringing, people are still coming in for vaccines, insurance problems are still happening, and the line is still waiting. I am not saying an overwhelmed pharmacy will definitely make mistakes, but ask yourself this: if the person checking your medication is constantly being pulled in 5 different directions, do you really feel comfortable with that? A long line annoys me. The unpredictability is what worries me. A 65-year-old taking several medications and does not want to wonder every month whether the refill is going to go smoothly. Someone taking care of aging parents does not want their workday broken up by calls to the pharmacy. And a family with a sick child definitely does not want to find out the medication is not ready, right when they need it most. And customers are not going to put up with this forever just because they have been going to the same drugstore for 10 years. As getting medication takes more and more time and effort, people are going to start looking at other options. Walmart grocery stores, mail-order pharmacies, or home delivery do not have to be better at everything. They just have to make getting medication less of a hassle. Americans are leaving drugstores to get their medication at Walmart and right at home. At this point, the shift is pretty clear. Americans still need prescriptions just like before, but they do not necessarily have to walk into a CVS, Walgreens, or a neighborhood drugstore to get them anymore. And really, I understand why. Walmart already has people coming in for groceries, household supplies, and things for the family. A lot of grocery stores do too. If the pharmacy is already inside a place you have to visit anyway, you can pick up your prescription while you are there and head home. No extra stop and no need to turn picking up medication into a separate trip. It sounds very simple. But that simplicity is exactly what traditional drugstores are now competing against. In the past, the neighborhood pharmacy was a destination. Now it can just be one more service inside a place where you already shop. Then mail order and home delivery, but take it even further. Medication you take every month can be refilled through an app processed at a central location and delivered right to your home. For someone who works shifts, has young children, or is simply too busy to make another stop, that option makes a lot of sense. If your medication can show up at your door on schedule, why would you drive to a drugstore just to pick up a paper bag? And I do not want to pretend these newer models are all bad either. Large systems have logistics, technology, and centralized processing that a small store has a very hard time competing with. For a lot of customers, it really is more convenient. Even the pharmacy store itself is changing. Some newer models are shrinking the front retail section and focusing much more heavily on prescriptions. When you think about it, that makes sense too. If customers already buy shampoo at Walmart, snacks at Costco, and household supplies on Amazon, why keep a large drugstore just hoping they will grab a few extra things while they are there? Some prescriptions still stay with CVS and Walgreens. Some move to Walmart or grocery store pharmacies. Some go through mail order. Some get delivered to the home. And some places are trying smaller stores that focus almost entirely on pharmacy services. So I would be very careful about saying that pharmacies are disappearing. Not exactly. What may be disappearing is the kind of pharmacy Americans have been used to for decades. A store right in the neighborhood, the pharmacy counter in the back, consumer products in the front, a place you physically visit every time you need a refill. The new model works by different logic, bigger scale, more centralized processing, more logistics, and less dependence on customers walking into one specific store. Some people are going to like that. I understand them too. Faster, simpler, fewer trips. There's nothing wrong with convenience. But convenience comes with one condition that is easy to forget. It is only convenient if that system actually fits the way you live. Someone who is comfortable using apps may think home delivery is a great solution. A family that already shops at Walmart may think having the pharmacy inside the store makes a perfect sense. But not everyone starts from the same place. And as the system gets designed more and more around the people who can adapt the easiest, the people who cannot keep up are often the ones who need stability the most. Older Americans and communities with fewer pharmacies risk being left behind. After all of this, think about the real consequences when a pharmacy closes. The same close sign can come with a completely different cost for a 40-year-old than it does for an 80-year-old. A 40-year-old who still drives to several pharmacies nearby and is used to handling everything on a phone can probably switch locations and move on with life. But an older person who has used the same place for years does not have the same room to adjust. They might be taking 4 or 5 medications every day. Some no longer drive, some still live independently, still go to their own doctor appointments, pick up their own medication, and remember their own refill dates without needing anyone else's help. Then the pharmacy near their home closes. If you think that just means traveling a few extra miles, it does not. Now, they have to ask their kids if they are free over the weekend. They have to see if a neighbor happens to be going that way, or something they used to handle on their own in 20 minutes suddenly has to be planned around somebody else's schedule. To me, that is the cost people are most likely to overlook. A person does not immediately lose access to their medication, but little by little they can lose the ability to manage getting their own medication on their own. And where you live makes a huge difference. In an area with 6 pharmacies, losing one store still leaves 5 others. In a town with only 1 or 2 options, losing just one store can completely change how people there get their medication. About 57 million Americans were already living in areas with limited access to pharmacies. Nearly 29 million more depended heavily on a critical pharmacy because there were not many other options nearby. Think about what those numbers are telling us. There are places where the system still works normally simply because one store is still open. Lose that one store and everything changes immediately, and then insurance narrows those choices even more. Google Maps might show 3 pharmacies near your home, but one is not in your preferred network. Another gives you a higher copay. The last one is the only place that really works with your insurance. 3 dots on a map. But for your wallet, there may really be only one choice. And if you take medication, long-term switching pharmacies is not like switching grocery stores. Prescriptions have to be transferred. Refills have to stay on schedule. Insurance has to go through the new system. Sometimes the doctor has to send the information again. A healthy person might call that a few annoying steps. But for someone keeping their blood pressure, diabetes, or another chronic condition stable with daily medication, those steps are exactly what keep life from getting knocked off track. Same medication, same prescription. But whether you can actually get it depends heavily on your age, your ZIP code, your transportation, and the kind of insurance you have. And when those things determine how easily someone can keep getting the medication they need, we are way beyond a simple retail problem. Pharmacy closures are becoming a healthcare access problem. I used to think of pharmacy closing was mostly a retail issue. One store leaves, customers go somewhere else, and the market adjusts. But the more I look at how Americans actually get their medication, the more I realize that way of thinking is too simple. Because a pharmacy does not just sell shampoo, vitamins, or snacks. It is the place where a prescription finally has to become something the patient can actually hold in their hands. And if that last step does not work smoothly, everything that happened before it can start to feel meaningless. You have insurance. Good. But is the pharmacy near your home in the right network? The doctor prescribed the medication. Good. But does the place you can actually get to have it in stock? There are 3 pharmacies in your area. Good. But which one keeps your copay at a level you can actually afford? What bothers me is that on paper a patient can look like they have everything they need. A doctor, a prescription, insurance, a pharmacy. But the patient is still the one who has to connect all of those pieces. And for an older person, it's someone with a chronic condition, someone who lives far from the center of town, or a family already trying to manage too many things at once. All it takes is one part of the system becoming harder to use for the whole process to become more difficult. Patients do not take prescriptions. They take medication. I do not need the healthcare system to be perfect, and I am not against technology delivery or centralized systems if they truly make life easier for people. But I have one very simple standard when someone needs medication. Can they get it on time at a price they can afford, without having to turn themselves into the person coordinating the entire system? If the answer depends more and more on your zip code transportation insurance network gauge, or whether you have family members who can help you, then we are way beyond the question of whether a drugstore is doing well or doing poorly. To me, that is the most worrying part. A service can still exist on paper, but if it becomes harder and harder to use in real life, the patient's sense of security starts disappearing with it. PBMs are facing more pressure, and local pharmacies may have a new opportunity. There is one very easy way to end everything we have just looked at. If a pharmacy closes, that is just what happens, and the market will eventually find something to replace it. But I do not think people should have to accept every gap in the system and then figure out how to deal with the consequences on their own. At least some things are starting to move in a different direction. The FTC has increased pressure on PBMs, focusing on transparency, how pharmacies are reimbursed, and the final costs that end up falling on patients. To me, this is where the system really needs fixing. If a pharmacy keeps filling prescriptions, but some of those prescriptions are reimbursed below cost weighting until the pharmacy closes, and then worrying about a lack of pharmacy access is already too late, I do not want to keep every store open at any cost either. A pharmacy that is not operating well may have to close. But if a town has only one place left, keeping the entire community from falling into an area with limited pharmacy access, I want the system to recognize that before the close sign goes up. And the future does not have to look like the past. Smaller pharmacies, pharmacy counters at community health centers, centralized prescription and processing delivery mail order, or local pharmacies working together could all be part of the solution. I do not need the pharmacy of 1995 to come back. I need a system in 2026 that is smart enough to know what should be preserved and what should change. And for regular people, do not wait for the system to become perfect before you prepare. Know where your backup pharmacy is. Check which locations are actually in your insurance network. Know where your prescriptions will be transferred if your store closes. If you are managing medication for aging parents, decide ahead of time who will handle things when there is a problem. You cannot fix the PBM system by yourself in one afternoon. But you can keep one store closure from turning into your whole family scrambling to figure out where the medication went. And at the very least, that is one piece of control we can take back right now. The future of pharmacy in America will depend on how this industry changes, and on whether people are willing to accept the growing gaps in access. At the very least, we can start by seeing clearly what is happening. When the pharmacy near your home closes, when getting a refill becomes more unpredictable, or when the pharmacist is constantly working under too much pressure, that is no longer just one isolated inconvenience. It shows that the way Americans get access to medication is changing right in front of us. And the more we understand how the system works, who is under pressure, and what price people are being forced to pay, the more reason we have to demand that it work better. I want to hear about your experience. Has a pharmacy in your area ever closed? How did getting medication change for you or someone in your family afterward? And share your experience in the comments. Every real story helps make this problem easier to see.